Hashtag no music, no intro. Another episode of the Saints Block Party podcast, and this is a big podcast for us. We have the one and only co-owner of Reception Perception, Matt Harmon, joining our podcast. It feels a little surreal for Matt to be joining our podcast. But it's an honor. Me and Ryan have been friends since what, 2012-ish?
13.
And I feel like me and Ryan met through Twitter. This sounds like a love story, but
it is.
And it is. And let's normalize men saying "I love you" to each other and having those type of friendships.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that time, I feel like we have both been following Matt Harmon the same time, and have seen the growth, the glow up, everything that he's done with Reception Perception, working at Yahoo, having a podcast with Austin Eckler, just so many things that this man has done. So it's truly an honor and a privilege for you to join us and talk about New Orleans Saints, man.
I mean, dude, you guys are way too nice to me to start off this thing, but I appreciate it. And yeah, I was just doing a little reflecting actually about the last 10 years as well recently, because that's about as long as I've been doing this thing. And, Reception Perception data itself goes back to 2014, because that was really the first year that I started collecting league-wide data. And even to the point now that there are some guys that I was a huge fan of in the to start the RP era, like Allen Robinson and John Brown, that I've now Reception Perception has outlasted some of the early favorites of Reception Perception, which is crazy. And it makes you feel kind of you talk about normalizing guys saying I love you to each other. Makes me feel like some kind of way. It makes me feel a little emotional about the whole thing and the journey. So it's been awesome. I've been super lucky and super grateful to have such a fun ride here, and I'm excited for a fun little program we got today.
Yeah, we're gonna have fun. But if you don't know what Reception Perception is, go to receptionperception.com. There's the basic level at $19.99, the level that we subscribe to $29.99 a year, or the highest level of, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not $99.99 a year.
Yes, sir. And it is appropriately called the sicko package, because if you want if you want every piece of Reception Perception data that I've charted since 2014, number one, I love you, and we all love you, but you are a sicko, and that is what you get with that level of access.
Look, man, the people listen to our podcast during the off season. They're all sick. Like, if you listen to this podcast, you're a sick person. There's no reason you're a healthy person. But that's why we all came together, on
Twitter. Please keep listening.
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sick too, But we all came and go. What I always talk about is interesting watching how everybody grew. Like, from that time of 2012, 13, I remember Daniel Jeremiah was just like just an anonymous scout on Twitter. You had Draft Mecca, you had Sigmund Bloom and all those guys, Matt Waldman. Guys just on Twitter talk like nerds talking about football, and now everybody has their own little platform now and on TV, and it's just crazy when you look at it. We like us, we got our own podcast now. It's like that we never even thought of that happening.
No.
Yeah, dude, things have blown up to such a crazy proportion, and I feel like I'm glad I got that start 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, something like that, because I couldn't imagine trying to break into the space now. It's so crowded, and there's so many people doing great stuff. There's so many people doing better stuff than me, and I'm glad that what I've done has stood the test of time, at least to this point. But you're right, man. It is really cool to see. I mean, you mentioned Draft Mecca. Charles McDonald and I both were cutting our teeth at Draft Mecca, Football Savages, and stuff like that. And now we work together at Yahoo. We were both at the Super Bowl this past year together. Each of the last two Super Bowls. So
look at that.
It's awesome, and it makes you, like I said, it makes you feel some type of way about just the weird friendships we've all built from that little Bird app, which is not even, dude. We've lived to the point that it's not even the Bird app anymore.
Always will be the Bird app. No, always.
I would never call it X. I don't care, man. I would never call it
X.
Not
in
never.
It's not me. Just so I think our listeners would just appreciate just hearing the Matt Harmon story of like how like we've talked about where you are now. I feel people who listen to us that, you know, we have people who want to do what you do or how you became kind of a self-made man, a business owner, things like that. If you just want to just give a quick synopsis of kind of how Reception Perception came about and how you are where you are right now.
Yeah, try to make a long story short here. Reception Perception was sort of the idea that, like, this time period that we're talking about, 10, 11 years ago, in my 1-bedroom Lynchburg, Virginia apartment. I'm back. I live back in Virginia now, and I lived in LA for the past 8 years before that.
Man, give me out of this cost of living. That's where I am right now. So I understand it, Mac. I'm just kidding.
I mean, but listen, but you're not wrong. you are not wrong with what you just said. But so again, yeah, all the way back in like 2013, I was just in a period of my life where I was looking to try to kind of find my way, that whole thing. And I'd always loved football. I love to write, and I love to just kind of like parse out ideas and think about things. So I started my own website, thebackyardbanter.com, back in the day. And that was where I started posting a lot of different type of content. But the thing that I was after was sort of what was something that was going to make me, a literal nobody, like stand out in an industry full of all of those names that at the time you mentioned, that were much more qualified to be talking about football really than I was. Somebody that, had I was like, man, I want to break into this industry so bad, but I didn't play in the NFL. I don't have connections in the league, anything like that. I don't have connections in media, period. Like all I have is a Twitter account and a website, right? That I'm paying like $20 a year to maintain a domain name or whatever. So I got to have an idea that's going to stand out in the crowd. And for me, the biggest question that I always had about football, because I grew up a real big boy. I never could play the wide receiver position, but I was obsessed with wide receivers. I was obsessed with, just even when you're watching games on Sunday, we all inherently know, like, we're most time people are watching the ball, right? You're focused on where the ball is, but you don't see what wide receivers are doing when they're running off screen, of course. Right. And like, for me, and any football fan knows this, you're lucky as a receiver to get like 8 to 10 targets in a game, but they're running, they're playing 60 plus snaps. They're running 30 plus routes. In my mind, I was like, somebody's got to try to give them credit for what they're doing even when the ball's not going their way. Like we talk about, and even like, again, reading scouting reports 11, 12 years ago, it's like, oh, this guy grades as a 6 out of 10 on my scale as a route runner, which, don't disrespect anybody that does that type of work, but it's like, what does that mean? I thought I was like, somebody should go in there and again, try to quantify separation and quantify route running. And that was what I decided to do. So, my dad, he actually told this story, he'll tell a story anytime, but he told a story at my wedding, actually. Like he can still, because I ended up meeting my wife out in California and actually through work at Yahoo Sports. And, again, now we live back on the East Coast. Yeah. So
congrats,
like
man.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Like he told the story at my wedding, just remember seeing where it all started, like that 1-bedroom Lynchburg, Virginia, just see all these papers, which I actually still have the same ones back here that I do all the charting off of still to this day, strewn all over the floor. And he's like, what the hell's going on here? I was like, I got this idea, reception perception,
Love it. Give me like amped, bro.
I'm like, I'm trying to work on this receiver thing. It's for the website, whatever. And, again, to see it become what it's been and gone through so many different outlets, whether it was Football Guys, the fantasy footballers for a while, to now being its own thing at receptionperception.com. I mean, I'm just, like I said, I'm very lucky. And, again, that's kind of long story short, but to me, it was really just about, I wanted to answer the biggest question I had about football, which is, what are wide receivers doing away from the ball, and how can we better understand that position, which at the time in 2013, around that era, I felt like the league was crowded with great wide receivers back then. And it was this 2014 class that was coming in, which ended up being Mike Evans and Odell Beckham and Sammy Watkins, the aforementioned Allen Robinson, Devontae Adams, Marquise Lee, LOL, like Kelvin Benjamin. But like, this great 2014 class was supposed to be coming. I was like, man, this feels like the time to be in on wide receivers. And I mean, now it's exploded so much to the receiver position. So
crazy.
I think it remains the most fascinating position in football. And I'm lucky to still be kind of trying to figure that thing out all these years later.
It absolutely. Go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. Like I was saying, it's just crazy, just this whole industry. You know how you just got to find your niche, finding what you're interested in. And look, I mean, there are people out there that's just craving more data. I'm constantly looking for
Mhm.
data to aggregate, data to
Yeah.
compile, so there's all. How do you go about compiling all that data? Like, or do you use different analytic websites to compile everything, or do you watch each game, every game, every tape, every player? How do you put it all together?
Yeah, so I do everything myself. Any piece of data that's on reception perception, the website or you see anywhere has always been collected by me in the last 10
Wow,
years. So I go in for college players and for NFL players, go in and chart an 8-game sample for all those guys. Because, like I said, back to
wow,
the era we were talking about when this got started was I was charting full seasons, and I was like, this is gonna not. This is a lot of work. So like where I was trying to test where did the data like normalize, like things
yeah,
just kind of stabled to a point where this is representative of what a guy's doing over the course of a full season, and I found right around 8 games
Interesting.
was that cutoff. So
right,
that's so for every piece of data, unless it's
Wow.
otherwise noted on the site.
Right.
It's an 8-game sample, and it has always been me, man. And James Coe is my business partner. You know, we met at NFL.com and NFL Network, and he's again we're great friends. He actually officiated my wedding, speaking my wedding again. But he has always kind of said like, you know, we could free you up to do more content if we brought in like people to chart the games, and I was like, no way. Like
Nope.
to me,
This is me.
you're gonna have to pry that number one like out of my cold dead hands, and two, that's what I love to do. Like I think
Right.
that's the value of it is that look, if you don't trust me or whatever, then that's fine. Then you don't have to trust what's on the website. But I just think, and again, no disrespect to other sites that do this, but I think it's just better. Like, you know, that I have been doing this. This is literally my life's work, which is,
hmm
you know, maybe pathetic
Right.
to say, but it is my life's work. I'm not some nameless, faceless person that you don't know who's compiling this stuff.
Put some
So
respect
that's
on
why
your
I've just,
name.
well, I mean, shoot, that's just why that's just why I have always kind of fought to keep the process myself.
yeah, it makes
That's
sense.
amazing, man. We like me and Jay's my partner. We've kind of started this thing going. This is the third year or fourth year we'll do it where because we're sickos, she's a epidemiologist, so she deals with stats and all that. And so what we've started doing is going back to 2006, all Saints data, every prospect that they've drafted,
Mm.
and gotten their like essentially like their profile or their type of players that they drafted per position using combine data, height, weight. And then what we started to do is then we match the data to incoming classes, draft classes, and where it'll hit on a center or right receiver that meets the metrics that the Saints have historically drafted going back to 2006. So it's it's crazy of how many players who are on that list that they actually like draft, and like it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of predictive of who potentially they're going to have their eyes for. So the data, the stats, all that, it's kind of just speaking kind of the language that we have. But if we're talking about the New Orleans Saints and we're talking about receivers, I would be remiss if we did not start with like this topic that has been burning all season regarding Chris Olave.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
There's this discourse of he's not a number one wide receiver. He potentially should be traded. He's not. There's a lot of discourse going on in the Saints fandom Twitter world regarding Chris Olave. I was looking up his 2003 profile. What does reception perception allude to regarding Chris Olave?
Yeah, I'm kind of stunned to hear there's any sort of discourse about that because
Tons.
I love Chris Olave. I had him ranked as a top 2 prospect at wide receiver in that class, and for me, it was like right there between him and Drake London, and that was a great receiver class. Oh, dude, at this point, every receiver class is a great receiver class.
Right.
You know, every year it feels like we got a great one, but especially that 22 draft class with Drake London and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Like, I really could have heard an argument that any of those 3 guys should be the top receiver in the class, but I had a special affinity for Olave because he is a route runner. And I
yeah,
just, you know, again, I'm This is what I've been studying routes and route running for the last 10 years. And really in terms of guys that have come into the league in that time span, and there's been some great prospects, he has got to be one of the 2 or 3 best just pure technicians at the position when we're talking about like prospects. And, you know, I mean, there have been guys that were, I think Jamar Chase was probably a better prospect at the time. But again, I'm just talking about pure route running standpoint. Like he was up there. He was number 1 in success rate versus man and press coverage in that draft class. And you immediately saw that translate to the league. And that's the thing. His year one reception perception profile was incredible. He was at or above the NFL average on every single route in terms of getting open. So this is a full field player. This is a guy that can get separation at all 3 levels of the field. Now he is not your typical X receiver, you know, in terms of build, in terms of where you're going to line him up. But, you know, neither is a guy like Stephon Diggs. I kind of felt like that there was to me, a player comparison between Diggs and Chris Olave. And Diggs was a guy that took the right quarterback and the right offense to really unlock him. And I sort of feel as if, you know, maybe Olave is that way. So we could talk about more about the offense last year and the offense this year, but just pure and simple for me, I love Chris Olave and I'm a huge fan of him. And I absolutely think he has the potential to be one of the top 10 receivers in the NFL.
Yeah. I think it was kind of underrated how quickly he hit the scene. I mean, it was week 1, season before last, his first season. He was productive. And usually, you know, sometimes it takes wide receivers a while, no matter where you draft them, a while to start being productive. And he just hit the scene like that. So I think it did raise expectations for him. And then, you know, he ran into this season, a lot of changes, new quarterback. He hit kind of a little slump in the middle of this past 2023 season. You know, some people called him, I think it was the Tampa Bay game, where he kind of looked like he wasn't giving full effort on a route or two. And then there was the whole thing with him and Derek Carr getting at it. Then
game.
Then
I remember the discourse. Yeah.
Then he got arrested for speeding, and it was like, oh,
right
man.
after
that. So it was just like, and we were covering it at the time, and we were trying to tell Saints fans, like, man, this is the first time this kid has really faced adversity from a football standpoint. You know what I'm saying? Like going to Ohio State, being the guy there, playing with excellent quarterbacks there, coming to New Orleans. First time he ran, and we just got to see how he handles it. And he finished the season fine. He making big plays, contested balls, and all that stuff. And one thing I kept noticing when I would go back and watch the tape to see what's wrong with Olave. I look, and I'm like, he's beating the cornerbacks. Like, he's winning. He's winning. He is open. Like, I'm like, what is – so I just didn't understand it, man. It's just crazy.
So one thing too that's important to remember, like to take it back to Chris Olave's rookie season, and this is where we'll get into this discussion to think about the offensive change here. Like you mentioned right away, and you're right that he was productive. He was clearly like a guy from week 1 that was not just productive, but beating NFL cornerbacks at an extremely high rate. And this is a guy that was running like a pure vertical route tree. I mean, you go back and look at like his reception perception year 1 profile, the routes where he is running like at an above average rate. It's the 9 route, it's the post route, it's the corner route, it's the dig route, it's the out route, and it's the curl route. Like he ran 7.4% of his routes in his reception perception sample in his rookie year were slant routes. That is the lowest I have charted since 2014. This is a guy that gets no layup routes, and I haven't charted out his full season from this past year yet, but I did do I think about 4 games in the middle of the season, and it was pretty close to the same thing.
Right.
Which, so again, to put that into context, like, because maybe everybody doesn't kind of just intuitively understand this, the lower success rate routes are all the deeper routes. Like, you're going to it's easier to get open on slants and these like layup routes around the line of scrimmage. And Olave just doesn't get any of those layup routes, at least not in the Pete Carmichael offense. I think that's going to change going forward, so that should be a good thing for him. But I think that adds to sort of the volatility in his game from a target perspective or like, look, there were definitely some drops he had this year. There were balls he absolutely should have caught, and you know, any high level receiver is going to hold themselves to a really high standard. But you know, the further you get targeted down the field, the more high degree of difficulty some of those passes are going to be. So that's another thing to remember when we're talking about Chris Olave. But yeah, you're right that there was a lot of adversity, I think, on the field for him. I think he handled that well. I think he's wired the right way. I've only met him one time, not the past year's Super Bowl, but the year before that. Guy's pretty like straight shooter, doesn't say a lot, just very focused on like football and talking about football, and that's it. Seemed like a great guy, but I was surprised by the speeding stuff and anything like that. But you're right that he seemed to handle it well and was fine the rest of the season. So you know. Listen, we've all done things when we were young that we probably shouldn't have done.
Oh Lord!
And I think what counts for him.
And I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough during his rookie season. His quarterback was Jameis for like 3 games, and then he had like Andy Dalton like the entire rest of the season, and still had a great rookie season. So it's just interesting, the discourse that continues around him, and it seems a little silly, but I think that just comes, like you said, like he kind of set the standard pretty high as a rookie, and just kind of building upon that. What you talk about the Pete Carmichael offense now shifting to this Clint Kubiak offense. No one knows what that's going to look like. I think there's a lot of assumptions it's going to be very similar to Kyle Shanahan's offense. I went back and tried to watch some Vikings 2021 when Clint Kubiak was the OC to kind of see potentially how it'll look. But you talked about maybe like more layups in regards to Olave or what have you. Can you just expand on that a bit?
Sure. Yeah. Of course, we don't really know what this offense is going to look like. We have seen Clint Kubiak call an offense, like you mentioned, 2021. But I think it's going to look a lot like all the Shanahan and the Kubiak stuff. I mean, obviously look at the last name. That's clearly the tree we're getting here. I think the main focus of that offense is to maximize individual players and make life easier on the quarterback. Like, certainly there are going to be some more designed shot plays. That's was always one of my biggest complaints with, and I had to be straight, I had a lot of complaints with the Pete Carmichael offense. I think it was not a fun offense to go back and watch on film on a weekly basis. A lot of issues there. But I always felt that the shot plays were like these Chris Olave go routes where, I mean, he obviously can get separation and win on those, but unless it was like Rashid Shaheed, like on a busted zone coverage, it felt like there was a real lack of design shot plays. I think that's going to be a part of this offense with your number one receiver. And like, that's again, another thing that was an issue, I think, in the previous offense was if Chris Olave was going to get a target in the intermediate area, he was going to get a target in the downfield area, he's going to have to work for it, right? And like, again, he's a number one, in my opinion, he's a number one receiver, and he could do that. But look at the offenses that have, just even the Texans offense last year, where Bobby Slowick, I didn't really know much about Bobby Slowick before last year, but other than he's coming off the 49ers coaching staff and had connections to this coaching staff dating all the way back to the Washington days with RG3 in that rookie year. Again, but we didn't know what he was going to look like, much like we don't really know what Clint Kubiak is going to look like. But you saw from week one of the Texans offense this last year, like, they know that Nico Collins is a dude, and they're going to line him up at X receiver, and they're going to have him rip these in-breaking routes, and they're also going to have this explosive, light rookie receiver, Tank Dell, work as the slot receiver on the same side of him, or the outside breaking route receiver from a flanker perspective. And like, those routes are going to make sense. They're going to open each other up. I don't think we had a lot of that last couple of years in the Saints offense. I think you were asking guys to just kind of go win ISO ball. So that's exciting for me to see from that's exciting for me to see from all of these receivers' perspective, not just Chris Olave, but I think like that slant route percentage I said for Chris Olave earlier, I'd bet a lot of money that's going to at least get to like 12%. Maybe we're looking closer to like 15, 16, and like those layup routes are just going to be more involved in his route tree. And then it will just really be up to the quarterback to take those because I'm definitely curious to get your guys' opinion about Derek Carr. To me, when I thought of this at one point during the year, when I think it was after that same Tampa Bay game when Alvin Kamara had like 13 catches for 33 yards or something like that.
Yeah.
It just jumped into my mind at that point that like we all know that Derek Carr is addicted to the check down. Like he wants to take that check down. When there's pressure on him, he's taken that check down. It's like as if you, and I think I tweeted this at one point during the year, it's as if you just like took a pack of cigarettes and put it on a smoker's nightstand every day so that when they wake up, it's the first thing they got to think about. Because Alvin Kamara is a great pass catching back.
Right.
So
he's talking to the smoker right here.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So it's just like that it's the first thing he's going to think about as soon as that heat comes in. He's going to take that check down. But I think in this offense, there will be more layup routes closer to the line of scrimmage for a receiver like Olave to get open on as opposed to some of that downfield stuff, if all of that sort of makes sense.
No, it makes plenty of sense. And Derek Carr was so weird last year.
Weird,
because
man.
me and Adam was like, look, Derek Carr, fine quarterback. We were kind of, excited when we signed him. We knew he was not going to be like a top 5 or top 10 quarterback, but we thought he would at least solidify the position and a professional NFL quarterback.
Mhm.
But we just started finding out things behind the scene that really rubbed us wrong. And then just the way he functioned in the offense didn't work. Pete Carmichael, we know he's not the best OC. We know that. So it just didn't all come together. But the thing was weird with Carr is there were times when we wished he would throw more, not check downs, but like intermediate routes and shorter routes, because he would sit there and hold on to the ball, looking downfield. And it's like, bro, like you got Alvin Kamara right there, you got Juwan Johnson right there, throwing over the middle. Like I don't know if there's a heat map, but his throws over the middle are just not there. Like he just
almost not
doesn't
existent.
do it. It's just weird, and it's just weird because it's the Saints' offense.
It's also weird because he
Yeah.
cooked with Darren Waller. Like he had such a great rapport with Darren Waller with Foster Moreau. Like in it, so I know that like for fantasy football, like the uptick in Juwan Johnson as being like a tight end 1 prior to the fantasy football draft last season was up, and it just none of it happened. Like it was just not existed.
I was super surprised by the lack of Johnson in particular, and just again, it was an offense that to me didn't make sense. And especially didn't make sense to the personnel that was there. It felt like it was still an offense that, and I think the Jets actually struggled with this to a much more embarrassing and easier to see degree. But both of these two teams I felt were similar in that they struggled to take an offense that was so clearly designed for like a Hall of Fame elite decision maker, elite processing quarterback.
Speaking of
and adjust it to a guy that's just not that. Obviously, Zach Wilson ain't that, and like Tim Boyle and the boys in New York, they're not
right.
That. But even Derek Carr, like this is a guy that you have to work around. This is a guy that you have to incentivize to take some of these throws that we are talking about here. And John Gruden, not a perfect guy, but he did a great job over the course of Derek Carr's time with the Raiders, kind of incentivizing him to buy into this offense. And I just think, like to your point, that it felt very touchdown to check down type read for Derek Carr, and a guy that I don't know Derek Carr, but from some dude on the street. I don't know him at all, but it felt like a guy that was hearing all the check down noise and then is trying to push it down the field. Overcompensating. Exactly right. So again, I felt like it was one of these offenses that, and then, it bled into the receivers too. And like I said, I'm a receiver guy. I'm generally going to maybe Ty goes to the receiver type of thing. But what you would see these guys on film, I'm sure you guys, it's like they're throwing their hands up. They're like, it's a lot of like hello, and again, it's just bad habits all bleeding into each other. That was the habits this year.
And and we've talked about this on the podcast. So, like a quarter of the season, I guess Derek Carr was given a lot of flexibility in terms of like calling audibles, changing plays, and a big thing that plagued the team early is an audible would happen and he would not properly like communicate the receiver, like for the receivers to go. So if you go back early in the season, you see a lot of the receivers running to like the same spots on the field, same area, because it wasn't properly communicated to them that they were supposed to run different routes by Derek Carr. All that said, towards the end of the season, the last people like to talk about the last 3 games. They forget to bring up the Rams game, which was a disaster, and I was there for, and it looked like we were not.
Looked like the Saints. That was rough.
Now we want to talk about reception perception for the Rams and Sean McVay with Puka that game. Anyhow, but he did play well. He played well against the Bucs. He played well to end the season, and we saw a lot of play action, and he was more decisive. And I felt like he gave receivers chances to make plays earlier in the season, later in the season, rather than waiting for them to throw it when they were open. And they made plays for him because they have such a interesting. Like I feel like the Saints' weapons are kind of underrated for the talent that they have with Olave, with Shaheed. We saw some glimpses of A.T. Perry a little bit. And we got to see them make plays. And so if that Derek Carr can maintain throughout a season, I think the Saints have done something offensively, but that's such a huge portion of it.
Yeah, like I think that Derek Carr is one of these guys that he's not the worst quarterback in the league. You can have stretches where you feel like he's just, I mean, is this a bottom barrel type of guy? And I mean,
we were there. Oh boy,
yeah, we lived through some of them last year. There's no question about that. I don't know. Again, I'm preaching to the choir here when I'm talking about this stuff, but but again, he's not a. There's just like the environment around him has to be right, and he's just one of those guys. And of course, then you get into do you pay one of those guys this amount of money? And it's just like, well, that is a decision that has been made by this team, and like now, how do we make it work? I think that's where they're at from a financial standpoint, just like a roster building standpoint. But I think that there's plenty reason to think that they can stretch that chapter that Derek Carr had out into a greater portion of the season. I don't think you're going to get that I don't think you're going to get that for 17 games, but if you get it for 10 or 11, like then you've got a better offense than you did last year. And then if those other 7 games or 6 games or whatever, if he's like the 20th best quarterback, not like at times I really felt like he was like the 28th or 29th,
It was bad, Matt. It was
bad. Yeah, I feel you. So again, we just need to raise the ceiling and raise the floor, which I do think is possible because I'm with you that I like this receiver core. I don't know, like I think obviously they're Michael Thomas, great career, great peak as a Saints player, but I don't think he's coming back this year. I liked A.T. Perry a lot. I could not believe he fell as far as he did in the draft. I don't know if you guys have more insight on as to why that is than I do, but I really like
Wake Forest coaches really kind of harped about his immaturity issues as a player while he was there, and it kind of
and it was weird because everyone I talked to that like dealt with him while he's with the Saints, super professional, like team guy and everything. So he just got screwed by the coaches, I think.
Which is weird.
Same thing happened to C.D. Deuce, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson at Florida. Same exact type of situation.
Yeah, which is always like definitely. I can understand why people would take that as a red flag because usually your collegiate coaches are the last people that are going to – they're usually going to be the first to gas you up and the last people to push you down. So and Wake Forest was a weird offense. I mean, they're pretty close to like the Looney Tunes offenses that we see in college football. So they're up there. But to me, from a traits perspective, and this is why I think it's important to isolate wide receiver play, from a traits perspective, he looks like he's on that X receiver access where he's a big guy. He can beat press off the line of scrimmage. He can get open against man coverage. Not a perfect player for sure. I think there's still some kinks to iron out there, but he does, at least to me, have those traits to be a starting level X receiver in the NFL. You know, James and I always talk about on the podcast, like the Devontae Parker axis of X receivers, because Parker is like Parker was at his peak, and RP has always been pretty anti Devontae Parker. And like, I know that now it's like, oh, Devontae Parker, Patriots receiver, like that's a joke. Go back and read some people's tweets in 2015,
love
2016.
Devontae Parker.
I loved him. I loved him.
He was giving Stephon Gilmore that work when he was with the Dodgers. Couldn't tell me anything, bro.
He was, and to me, he was just always that like baseline of NFL X receiver. And if you were better than Devontae Parker, you were a high, like you're somewhere on that. Like, are you Cortland Sutton? Are you T Higgins? Are you? I mean, shoot, are you all the way to like the elite level? Are you like, or are you more like Mike Williams? Right? Like that's better than Devontae Parker. Then they're like, if you're worse than Devontae Parker, you're like DJ Chark or so. Again, so somewhere
like,
along that.
He's like the Dalton scale. The Dalton scale of X receivers.
The around the NFL guys. Yeah, shout out Chris Wessling, the Dalton scale. Yeah, Devontae Parker is the Dalton scale. I've never thought about it that way, but yeah, he's
bro,
the Dalton
when you were saying it, that's like exactly what it is. Like I was thinking the same thing.
The prime meridian of X.
He is the NFL. He's the prime, like not Patriots Devontae Parker. Like you're
talking
about Dolphins Devontae Parker is the prime meridian for NFL X receivers.
That's perfect.
So yeah, I think that A.T. Perry could be somewhere along that axis. Where he is, I don't know, but I think I have hope that he can be somewhere in that like starting level X receiver mold.
That'd be awesome.
I love Rashid Shaheed's game as well. Again, not a perfect player, but man, like that's a guy that can burn, and that's a guy that can get open. Again, these are all guys that are really high quality separators to me. So it's just on like the quarterback to take throws, but also the coordinator to design some ways to get for these routes to make sense together.
Exactly. There's one thing like when we used to watch. I remember I used to watch Sean Payton's offense with the Saints, especially like in the Drew Brees was still in his prime and all that stuff. And man, it was like art in motion, man. Like you watch all the route concepts and how everything came together, and utilizing this talent and that talent, and how they'll marry the two and put defenses in the quandaries. I was like, Pete Carmichael, you've been under Sean Payton all these years. Why have you not learned any of this, man? Like, everything was so hard on offense the past couple of years, and so I just didn't understand it. But I guess flipping over to the draft, how much work have you done so far with this incoming draft prospects?
Yeah, started on mostly the top level guys. I'm going to have prospects on the site earlier than ever this year because I couldn't help myself. Usually I try to take January
subscribe.
Off. Yeah. Please subscribe to the website. So I usually try to take January off of charting just to give myself a little bit of break before we dive into free agency, which is kind of where I am right now here in February.
Right.
But everybody was talking about this 24 draft class and like Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors and Roma Dunze, and like I couldn't help myself. So I did get started a little earlier this year. So I've looked at some of mostly the top 4 guys, but also seen a few guys that are a little lower than that.
So one of the last questions I have, because we don't want to keep you too long, because we're on the topic of the draft. In some mocks, we're seeing Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU mocked to the Saints at 14. Don't see a lot of Keon Coleman mocked to the Saints, but the Brian Thomas Jr. kind of has been like a consistent one that's been happening like the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you've watched both of those players. I'm not trying to give you to like give the goods, but like if one of those players were an option at 14, which one, and obviously we don't know what the Clint Kubiak option or offense looks like, but which one kind of intrigues you more as a prospect from what you've seen and charted thus far?
Yeah, so I've gotten a few games in on both of those guys. So I got, again, not a full sample. That'll be more rounded out here in the next couple of weeks. But I do think I got a pretty good handle on both those players. Specifically, Brian Johnson, he is definitely going to be somewhere on that X receiver axis that we were just talking about. And man, he is exciting because he's so explosive. I mean, this is a guy that runs like 3 routes. And sometimes when you hear that, like players, we talk about that, like it's not true, but that's the guy that really does run just like 3 routes. And I mean, it's very reminiscent of the DK Metcalf route tree from like early in his career. He's not nearly as like freaky as DK Metcalf, but he is explosive. He is fast, and he shows you that he can beat press coverage, which is what, if you're going to be a starting X receiver, you have to be press coverage, period, end of story. And I think that Brian Thomas gives you that. So I think from a Saints perspective, that would really tell you where they're at with like an A.T. Perry. Do they think that A.T. Perry is a guy who can compete to start for them? Then you're probably not taking a Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round. But if they don't think he's that guy, then I think that Brian Thomas makes a little bit more sense there. And he would definitely give you, I think, something different from an A.T. Perry anyways, and that we're talking about more long speed. We're talking about more ability to rip you on go routes. And I think that A.T. Perry is going to give you, whereas Perry, and actually, again, to tie this into the Clint Kubiak and the Bobby Slowick and the 49ers of it all, he's a little bit more kind of in that Nico Collins mold to me, where he's a big receiver that can get you on in-breaking routes. So again, it would be a different dimension, but I think that would kind of like, if they take Brian Thomas, they're probably not thinking A.T. Perry's a future starter for them. Now, Keon Coleman is interesting because he's built like a big X receiver, and he wins some contested catches like a big X receiver. But he's one I'm struggling with to see kind of like the vision a little bit, because the separation concerns are for sure real. And I think he is going to end up being more of like a movable chess piece type. Like, this name is not going to excite people when I say it, but
I think I know what you're going to say. Come on.
Who do you think I'm going to say?
Kelvin Benjamin?
No. Okay. No. No.
Damn.
Although there were times
whoa. Can we put some respect on? Like, him and Cam was cooking for a little bit. Like,
I was gonna say there were times that Kelvin gave you some moments. I just think he probably didn't take some of the parts about being a pro too seriously. But there was definitely some times with, Kelvin had a freaky wingspan. I mean, that was just
he did.
He was great for Cam. I mean,
Baby
he's
Megatron, remember that?
He was better than Devin Funchess. I'll tell you that from a Panthers receiver.
That is a name I have not thought of in ages. Oh my god!
There were some real wars on like fantasy Twitter about like Devin Funchess is actually going to be better than Kelvin, and that's like a war that nobody, like, who really won that war?
Nobody.
We all lost.
Cam Newton lost. Actually, that's who lost that war. But actually, because I was going to say that Keon Coleman maybe reminds me a little bit from like a deployment perspective, what the Steelers did with Chase Claypool in his rookie year, which actually ironically like isn't too dissimilar to Devin Funchess, like kind of slot receiver, tight end adjacent type stuff. And I mean, Devin Funchess actually even moved to tight end. I think was on the Lions roster as a tight end recently. But and Chase Claypool was interesting because he kind of was that way too, where big guy, physically gifted, I think gives you more after the catch than. And this is all stuff with Chase Claypool. Like, who cares? I'm not. This is not a Chase Claypool take, but like, I think from a Keon Coleman standpoint, going to give you more after catch than you probably would think. So I again, this is where I'm at with him right now, where I think that's kind of the deployment I'd like to see from him. I don't see a guy that's going to like line up outside and be your starting X receiver. I think you got to be a little more creative with him.
Did Brian Thomas frustrate you in watching him? Because I watched a couple of games of him like over the weekend, and like, he's so enticing, but there was part of me that was just like I don't know how to like verbalize
it. It's a consistency thing for me. Where the guys I like, I mean, the guys that I like are like the Olaves and like the Roma Dunze from this class. It's just like, so consistent. So like everything looks the same, but it's not. Everything looks the same, but it's not. You're just a guy that's going to tempo routes the right way. Like, again, Odunze is that guy in this class. Marvin Harrison's that guy in this class. Neighbors is a little more just like explosive, but you feel like he's I've heard other people comp him to DJ Moore, and it actually makes a lot of sense because DJ Moore was a guy that in college he separated and was really good at it, and was just because he was so explosive and he had just enough technical acumen. But then you see him year one in the NFL and you're like, hey, this guy's really struggling to beat press man coverage, but you get him out in the open field and like, we're cooking. And then the longer that he played, the more he caught on to it. That's kind of how I feel about Neighbors, but But Brian Thomas, I agree with you. It's a consistency thing with him, where that's why I think there's a clear separation between those three top guys, who I think are probably on like my stacked board on the website. I'm going to have them all in that like top 10 worthy tier. And I think there's a step down from Brian Thomas. And then it's just sort of like, is Thomas 2 steps down as a prospect? Is he 1 step down? But I think there's clearly a step down there.
Guess my last one. Is there a prospect that you studied over the years that you're kind of proud of, that you kind of planted your RP flag on, like this is my guy, and then he came to the league and actually produced and was good, stuff like that?
Like strictly prospect wise, or more like early NFL type thing?
Both. Why not both?
Why not both? Either way.
I mean, my God, there's been so many receivers over the years. One guy this year, especially, I was super proud to see like produce immediately and like I think shows superstar potential right away was Jaden Reed from the Packers. Man, I was such a big Jaden Reed fan. I thought he was
really.
Yeah, I loved Reed as a prospect, and he was a guy that wasn't consistently rated as a round 2 player, wasn't consistently kind of graded that way by a lot of people, but I thought, like, this is a high-quality separator and a player that can beat man coverage, and clearly a guy that you can line up in the slot and get him, like, design touches, and people have been calling him, like, Dairy Belt Debo because of the design touches that Jaden Reed got at one point this year, and part of me, like, this now like part of the mainstream discourse because of how the Super Bowl went, but I'm like, Jaden Reed beats man coverage better than Debo Samuel does. Let me just say that about Jaden Reed. So he was a guy that was actually, and by the way, like the Packers have so many of these incredibly talented young players.
Bro,
like Dontavian Wicks is incredible. So Reed was a guy that I was happy to see translate right away from this past year's draft class. To me, I think if you look back in like the RP archives, the guy that I'm always super proud of is Stephon Diggs, because reception perception showed like early on in his Vikings days that this was a guy that was 97th percentile in terms of beating man coverage. And I mean, you guys know this about Stephon Diggs because of the Minnesota Miracle. Not
Don't
to
even
bring
bother
up
me anymore. It's fine. I'm good. Okay. Now, maybe a disclaimer warning to our listener, but we've disconnected. We're good.
But it was like that was kind of the thing that put him on the map as like a player. Right. But even still after that, I still feel like the general public did not understand that this was like an elite tier receiver until he got to Buffalo, and then the marriage with Josh Allen and all that stuff. So that I think was a real validator for reception perception. Actually, it's funny too because Stephon and I know each other, have known each other now over the years, just because. I mean, when he was, I think it was right after that Minnesota Miracle, there was like right when I started at Yahoo, there was an event that we did with Verizon where I actually met him there for the first time and was able to like talk to him about reception perception. And he was like, "Oh yeah, that's totally right. I'm the best route runner in the league." So he's like, "You're doing good work." And now we've kind of like, we've done so many things together over the years, like media wise. So it's been a hell of a ride, reception perception over the years, but definitely was very proud of the Stephon Diggs.
It is. Being that you have all this data, this is the last one. Have teams ever like? Ryan and I always say like Cliff Kingsbury may not be like a great head coach, but no one can deny that he has an eye for quarterback talent at Texas Tech. He recruited Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes. He went to Arizona. He knew that Josh Rosen wasn't the answer. Drafted Kyler. So like that's his forte. Has any teams like reached out to you for like consulting for like? Incoming draft class for wide receiver to get your perspective?
No, not that I know of. I had one email from one team years ago. This was before Reception Perception was a website. This was when it was in like the Fantasy Footballers draft kit, and it was kind of hard to tell like a team personnel person like, yeah, I download this fantasy draft kit to get all my work. Wasn't maybe the most accessible thing I probably could have said. But that was years ago. It was only one team ever. I joked on the show this year, like Bill Belichick, like you
could have used you, bro.
I mean, dude, like all the mistakes that Bill has made at the wide receiver position over the years, one $29.99 subscription could have told him not to let Jacoby Myers walk in favor of Juju Smith-Schuster. Like $129.99. Bill, you got the money. We all know you got the money. $29.99 was all you need to spend to not make that mistake.
So maybe when he comes back to the league next year as a head coach, there'll be a subscription. Hopefully, we hope so.
I don't know about any consulting gigs, but I'll take one Prime subscription from Bill Belichick.
There you go.
There you go, Matt. This has been insanely unreal. It's been great, man. We know our listeners and viewers are going to love it. So again,
Yes.
receptionperception.com. If you're listening to this, Reception Perception isn't like a sponsor or affiliate. We don't care. Definitely, definitely, absolutely support Matt and James' work, co-owners of Reception Perception. It's been an honor, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Got the podcast too, right? Y'all on Yahoo?
Yes, so yes, sir. We got the Reception Perception podcast and also the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show, which I host 5 times a week during the season, 2 times a week during the off season when I feel like it, which is not this week. We're only 1 episode a week, but we just had a great show with Ben Solak from The Ringer breaking down coaching staff changes, one of which we talked about Clint Kubiak and the Saints, of course.
Cool.
Appreciate it, guys. It's been awesome to talk with you, and I mean, you made me feel way too good about too many things. So hopefully, appreciate you guys having me on. Hopefully, we didn't reveal any old wounds about the old Saints offense. We're all excited about the future. What this team's gonna look like.
Yes, that's it. And for it. Thanks so much, man, for coming over. Appreciate it. And with that, we're out.
Peace.